Hi, I'm Taylor McMullen, and this is the Hollywood Podcast.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle Green.
Hi, this is Kennedy Mallory.
And I'm Cameryn D. Starr.
Okay, guys, why don't you tell us what you've got going on? What kind of projects are you working on?
Okay, hey everybody. So I have a lot this semester. I am working on a feature film as well as a comedy spec. So for that, I'll be working on Shrinking. And then for my feature film, the goal is to write a romance comedy. Literally yesterday, I just got an internship through a subsidiary from the Blacklist called The Love List. So I will be working on the coverage of unproduced screenplays and feature films that revolve around romance. So that's what I'll be working on this semester. So I'm excited.
Awesome.
Bring back romance, y'all.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations.
As for me, I'm actually very blessed to work on Taylor's thesis, Blood Pact. Yes. I'm really excited to work on that and strengthen my campaign management skills and really bring awareness to human trafficking and strong women leads. I think that it's really a season for that, and especially with the new movie that just came out, One of Them Days. Mm-hmm. Have you guys got a chance to check that out yet?
I need to. I heard it was really good.
Definitely on the list.
Y'all gotta check it out. And it was great seeing some strong Black leads for sure. That's something I look forward to implementing in my work in the future. As for some projects I'm working on right now, it's mostly music because I am a musician. I'm working on an EP that's going to come out soon. So really my team and I have just been getting our ideas together, and I want to shoot some stuff in Joshua Tree. So it's exciting. Fun that I get to direct my own music videos and I get to sing and act and dance in them. So really I'm just trying new things this semester, this new season of life.
Amazing.
Wow.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yes. So what are some of your favorite Black films and Black shows?
Modern day, I have to go with Insecure. Yes. That I feel like everyone has to watch Insecure. Just seeing the day-to-day life as a Black woman and going through certain circumstances and how we just go about it. I think that's a perfect, just especially like in your 20s, and just how to navigate life and like what's considered the right or the wrong way to go about things. So I definitely enjoy Insecure. Growing up, I have to say Living Single. I love Living Single. That is a classic for me. Just seeing the production and getting to know more about the production. I know I did some research of Yvette Lee Bowser. She was the showrunner of Living Single, and just hearing about her journey getting to that point and being like the first Black woman to run her show and being on a high network like that. That was really inspiring just to see her story, because she started off as a production assistant for A Different World and then becoming an executive producer in the latter season, and then like transitioning to other projects to eventually go into Living Single. So I thought that was amazing and inspiring for my future works.
Nice. Cameryn?
Wow, I love that. I really love that. For me, I'm thinking of things I've been watching recently. I've been watching a lot of Abbott Elementary. I love Quinta. Like, I really love her work. And just seeing how raw she is in her acting, and everyone really on the show, I feel like it brings me back to reality of what life is like. Some things, they're not perfect, and some moments are just funny moments. And the fact that you can watch that show and just sit and say, like, this is life, Not everything has to be written for movies, for play. It can be written based off of real experiences or what we think is real. So that's something that I really like. I'm trying to also think of things back to the past, but y'all know I'm 19. So I can't say too much. But I'm trying to think of things that I watched growing up. I didn't watch that much growing up because my parents were pretty strict about my media advancements. So me getting into film is very recent. So I'm excited to hear a lot from y'all and like get input from you guys.
Yeah. It's interesting that you both mentioned women who also got their start in like the internet and YouTube and BuzzFeed, like Issa Rae with Insecure and Quinta with Abbott. It's just interesting because I feel like so many of people's favorite things now started in like a grassroots way. And I think so much of the rawness that you were talking about comes from like the more informal world of like internet entertainment and stuff. So it's kind of cool that they have that commonality.
Mm-hmm. How did you feel this holiday on MLK Day? Like, what was going on? Okay. You know, let's address the elephant in the room.
Yeah. To be completely honest, even before MLK weekend, I think after the election, just that night was just a lot because I was on, like, again, keeping up with, like, the updates on social media, especially with Twitter. And it got to the point for me, I was like, you know what? I'm going to get off this app, turn off my phone, and go to bed. Because if I just sit here and keep thinking about it, I'm going to be put on edge. And I hate to say that I had a feeling of what was going to be the result, but it's just like, you know what? Let me sleep on it. And then I wake up and I get a text from my brother. It's just like, I can't believe this BS. And it was like, okay. And I got, class at 3:05. I got to go through all of this and just processing that we're literally going back in time. It's almost a cycle, if you will. We're just kind of like revisiting events that our descendants have gone through, but again, in a more modern time, in a more oversaturated time, if you will, now that we have, the internet and just all this exposure and even misinformation as well. I think that's also taken a toll in just how I just process and react to things. So going to MLK, I'm going to strictly MLK. I'm not even going to worry about the inauguration because I think that's where my mind was. The inauguration, to me, it doesn't exist because, again, that doesn't apply to me because, again, last time I checked, I was part of that 92%.
Hello.
And I'm going to stay within that 92%. And with that, how we can move forward throughout these next 4 years, which is going to feel like in an eternity. And just from what I've been seeing, the biggest thing just overall is just community for our Black folks and just how we can move forward at times like this. And we have been successful. I mean, looking at the myriad of films that you presented to us, we were able to progress and, keep our head high throughout times like this. So this isn't new to us. And I hate that I have to say that, but I think if we continue to curate a stronger foundation of community, I feel like we can have some stress off of our shoulders. Not a lot, but some just to get through this quote unquote presidency, if you will.
Well, yeah. I can see how, you shut it out. I can truly see, and I wish that I had the courage to do that because my mind was really there the whole day. I want to preface by saying that I'm from Washington, D.C. I grew up next to that block where he became the president on Monday. Wow. I grew up so close to that place, and I've been there, and now, it was filled with happy faces when I went, Black faces of joy, beauty, a community. But after seeing that video of the inauguration and Elon and other people there, it was like, is this our world? I honestly thought about moving away. I was like, okay, Canada, hey, y'all civil. I want to come over there. And even though I posted MLK and everyone was posting I'm like, this isn't enough.
Yeah.
Your posts, they're not enough.
No.
Your voice is everything. Use it. And if you feel like you can't use it, make yourself want to use it.
Mm-hmm.
We have more power than I feel like my generation thinks.
Yeah.
Truly, we do. But we have to be strategic about what our next move is, because they crashed out on January 6th.
Yeah.
They crashed out. We
And
can't
nothing
crash out and get the same result as them.
That's true.
Nothing happened.
I think that moving forward, strategy is everything. And although, like, I know we're all hurting and we don't know the next move, we don't know his plans, he can tell us one thing and do another thing. Why should we trust someone who hasn't proven he's trustworthy based off of his actions? I don't know. But I do know that we are still a community despite the issues which we have inside of our own community, that if it came down to it, it's still us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that this is a battle we can fight. Maybe not in this generation or our lifetime, but I don't think it's over with this inauguration. And I think me going back home to D.C., yeah, it's going to be different. And I'm going to be heartbroken to see my community flip turned upside down, but that doesn't mean that it's the end for me or the rest of the culture.
Yeah.
So that's my take on everything that's been going on, because I know MLK did not die for this.
At all.
No.
At all.
No. And the juxtaposition is just crazy, because as you were saying, like, it does feel like going back in time. And so what was it like kind of having to watch these movies and revisit this time in juxtaposition to what just happened?
I know for me, I watched Betty and Coretta, and one of the storylines, Angela Bassett plays Coretta Scott King, and let me add a preface. We focus on Dr. Betty Shabazz and Coretta Scott King as just, single mothers and widows of their spouses and how they move forward and, continue to hold on to their legacy. So one of the storylines for Coretta was making Martin Luther King Day a federal holiday and having to go through all those adversities trying to get that law passed and, make it a federal holiday today. And I just thought it was so interesting, like you said, the juxtaposition of, celebrating his legacy, yet within the same breath, we have, I'm not considering him as a president. That's not my president. Some guy who's in the White House acting as the president with all these rhetorics and propaganda that literally reflect the exact opposite of what MLK was fighting for. It felt very dystopian, almost like 1984, if anyone's familiar with that. Just it was a lot to take in. And kind of like I mentioned before, especially with those women and just continuing the legacy, but also dealing with grief at the same time. That was a big thing because they were kind of, again, not necessarily on the forefront like their spouses, but they did still play a vital role kind of creating that foundation, being the mother, being the wife, being an advocate for others within their surrounding communities. That's a lot of responsibility to take in, take in with just out of nowhere and just, a bunch of waves of, grief but still trying to keep a head held high, because again, now folks are relying on you to hold on to that torch and just keep the line moving. So I thought it was a lot to take in, and just how they were able to just again keep their head high and hold on to their spouse's legacy while just going through a whole bunch of events while they're doing that too.
I think as Black women, we still do that now. And, the man is often the face for what we're holding up. And, like you're saying, holding their legacy.
Yeah.
And we're making that sacrifice for them daily. And I really wish that was appreciated more in today's culture.
Yeah.
But I did get, but I did get a chance to watch back Selma, and I remember the Edmund Pettus Bridge attack. It wasn't just a cinematic masterpiece, but it started colorful. You know, we started fighting in that scene for our rights, and then it becomes dull the more and more the scene goes on, and the smoke fills the bridge, and it's so clouded. And for me, it felt like that's our economy. That's the vision we have. Everything is getting clouded. We don't know which direction to take. And like after 1619 and after slavery, you know, there was a foundation built, and it was never made for us to win. So it just leaves me with the thought, even in watching these movies, how do we win? How do we flip this script and build another foundation on the foundation that was meant for us to lose?
That's interesting that you noticed that it was colorful at first, because I almost forgot that it was that colorful because of how traumatic the cloud of it all was. That scene made me wonder why, and it made me start to become, I guess, critical of their minds, I guess, in the way that I feel like Martin was trying to be, trying to reason with the racism and then educate through acts of nonviolence, but then preparing your community and yourself for whatever may come. I think it's a position that I feel like we're in now, even if we are completely not active in what's going on as far as Trump and as far as the inauguration, as far as what Elon has pretty much signaled to everybody across the world what's going on in our country. I think I don't see how repealing diversity, equity, inclusion from the federal appointees in our government is going to help with making sure that we retain those protections that they fought for on that bridge, and the protections that Martin pretty much fought. I have an issue with saying that he died for something.
Yeah.
I that was also something that I had a problem with some of these films. Is like between Martin and Malcolm, they kept trying to push this rhetoric that they were ready to die and that they were like really comfortable with the idea of death. And I think that it perpetuates and it tries to normalize within an audience that like to be someone who speaks up for the community, to be someone who is a radical means to be okay with dying.
Yeah, to be a martyr.
Yeah, and I don't think that that was ever his goal to be a martyr. I think that he, at the times when people were blowing up his house and while his kids were in the house and his wife, I think at that point, I'm going to assume that you assess that there are threats not just only against me, there's threats against my family, and then you have to weigh the future of your entire community over the safety of your family. And to what Kennedy was talking about with Betty and Coretta and what Cameryn said about the strength that they were showing and the strength that Black women have to have in our community. And it's a lot. It's a lot for anybody, and I think that we hold ourselves to this expectation of like Coretta and Betty. They were the best wives that they could be to these martyrs of our community, but I know deep down that they were just as scared as anybody else would be. And I think that society likes to normalize that Black women are the strongest of all of the Americans, so we can just go through anything.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the word.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I know for me, especially with activism, because when I was an undergrad, I went to Loyola Chicago, and during the pandemic, like that 2020-2021 school year, I was a sophomore, and me and my friends, we co-founded this group called Our Streets LUC while we were protesting for, the justice for Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. And then alongside with that, there was also a racial incident at our school. And again, you have a group of 19-year-olds at the time on the streets of Chicago fighting, and we're like receiving threats to the point where some of my friends were like, they got arrested. And so having to wait at the precinct, waiting for them to get released until 5 a.m, and then literally a couple hours later, oh yeah, you got an 8:30, anthropology class you got to go to. That's a lot to take into consideration. So just thinking about the mental aspect of it all, and it's just like, that's a lot to take in for an individual. And just going back with that, I kind of had to let myself know that my identity alone is activism within itself. And that, not to say that you don't have to go to the forefront, but again, you are a person at the end of the day, and you have to know where your limits are. Because if you are overflowing your cup for others and not for yourself, you're not going to get that progress that you are striving to achieve, because you're not putting that within yourself. And that was a big thing, a big wake-up call for me throughout that year. It's like, I have to take care of myself, because at the end of the day, I'm a 19-year-old Black girl who's a student getting a degree in film and digital media. Not once in my head coming in freshman year was I saying, oh yeah, I want to be, a strong activist, walking down the streets of North Sheridan, trying to fight for my literal rights, and having to talk to the president, the office of the president, the dean of students. That's a lot to take in. And I think kind of like what you're saying, like, what necessarily, kind of like, what are we fighting for at a sense? Because from the broad scheme, our country, I don't think has fully, they've acknowledged it, but I don't think they've accepted the history and the actions and decisions that they have done toward marginalized people, specifically us as a Black community. And I think once we fully come to the full acceptance that we did this, that, and the third, I think that could be the transition where we can finally, for the first time, get to the right foot. Because I know even for like MLK Day, when the FBI, I know specifically on Twitter, like they posted like a MLK post, and it's just like, it's almost as if you were the cause to that problem. So it's like, it's almost hypocritical to, honor somebody while you played an important role to his death. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So I feel like until we, well, not us, but as a country as a whole, can fully come to the acceptance that what we've done has been harmful, and that we haven't been a community and a proud country that we tend to say that we are, we're not going to see that progress.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so many of these things are also just forgotten as well. Like, I don't know about you all, but I had no idea that Coretta Scott King was the person who campaigned for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I had no idea that it was because of her that we have this day to begin with. And I think it just goes to show that the activism did not end with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, but I was not taught that in elementary school. I was taught that by my mother. So it's things like that where, as you were saying, with the FBI tweet, that is crazy. But to the average young person on Twitter who doesn't know their history and how quickly these things are being forgotten, they may not even understand the insane irony of that. And so there is a debate and a conversation, because there are a lot of people who, and I agree to an extent, don't want to see so many movies about Black trauma all the time. Like, it's too much. It's kind of, people want to see Black joy on the screen, and there hasn't been enough.
Yes.
And so, what place do you all feel these types of movies have in the larger media landscape? How do you think moving forward this type of thing should be represented?
I think it's important that we, for a broad audience, display these real events because, again, it did happen. And like you said, does anyone know, like, again, like you said, not everybody knows that Coretta Scott King was on the forefront trying to push for this federal holiday. But at the same time, I don't want to go to the AMC and watch an hour 30 of Black trauma. That's a lot to take in. And I think there's a difference between Black trauma and informing somebody what happened. And I think also the accuracy of it all. And it reminds me of this one project that I did my junior year called Based on a Real Story, where because of the racism that was already instilled, especially in the rise in the film industry, it kind of set the tone of how, you know, Black people are being portrayed on the screen, let alone receiving the recognition that, you know, Black creators and Black actors deserve. Because, you know, the first big feature film during like that rise of, you know, film was Birth of a Nation, literally like about a couple decades after, you know, the Civil War, and you have white people in blackface portraying as slaves, and it's just like, oh yeah, the Ku Klux Klans are the heroic figures, and it's like, didn't we just go through 5 years of a war trying to fight for our rights? Meanwhile, we are portraying something that's so inaccurate. So I think with that, that's a glass that we have to break to provide that accuracy without having to full on show us Black trauma. And I think that's what aggravates me the most when we're trying to provide true events and just straight up Black trauma.
Yeah.
And also, I think what also aggravates me the most is when after that tragic event happens, it's kind of like you have that Hollywood ending. It's like, you know, we're going to keep moving forward.
Yes.
You know, we're going to keep our head high. That's not how it goes for certain situations. So I know like an example that I keep thinking of is The Green Book. I think they won Best Picture. I want to say that was 2020. It was a couple years ago, and that was very controversial because, again, you have a white savior who was flat out racist, you know, to their Black companion. But however, at the end of the day, they come together and it's like, racism is over. We can move forward. Not in the Deep South, it wasn't, you know. And even today, like, that rhetoric still remains. So I think we kind of have to be real with ourselves that there isn't, and I hate to say this, but there isn't a happy ending, but that's the truth at the end of the day. You know, we have to keep moving forward. We have to keep on progressing. There is no happy ending. There is no happy way to end people's legacies when it's as, you know, like blatantly violent as, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. There is no great way to kind of like close out their legacy because it ended in violence. And I think for me as a Black writer and a producer, to emphasize Black joy, and like in the beginning when we were talking about our favorite shows, you know, Insecure, you know, we can be Black and awkward and we can still have a good day. Like, we can still, again, yes, we're going through, you know, racial disparities, but I'm not just a tragedy. I have triumphs, especially when you have a society that derives and like sucks out of Black culture. However, we get reprimanded for embracing that pride. So again, going back to what I said, we have to accept the fault, not we, but as a country, we have to accept the faults that we have chosen to commit. And, you know, also be genuine with our sentiments, because I feel like now that like DEI has been like misconstrued, especially like with the word woke, it's now being misconstrued as to something else. I don't think a lot of allyship is almost gentrified, if you will, if you think about it. Like, I know in like 2020, everybody was making sure, I'm here with you, I'm here with you. But then like 1 second later, it's a whole 180. And I think it's because they don't want to get caught in the act that they're racist. So they're going to do everything in their power and overcompensate to say that, like, I'm the best ally, I'm here for you. But they're not digging deep enough to understand where we're coming from and having that empathy. And I think that's what they are afraid of, is seeing the actions that their descendants have created and how to like build off of that. That was a lot. So
No, that was good.
I went on a roll.
That's really good.
Cameryn, you want the mic?
That's good. Shoot, does she? I'm going to just sit up here and say, I agree. I completely agree that we have so many triumphs that should be celebrated. And by allowing other audiences to see our tragedy, they're going to have a pity party with that. And that's not what we want. We want change. But if that's what we have to do to make it change, we just got to keep going. Can I just ask, what's your favorite type of story to make? Did you talk about the rom-coms?
Yes, I know for my feature, what I like to focus on certain story tropes. So I know the goal that I want to do is like Grumpy and Sunshine with the two characters and how like they come together, like their world completely changes. I know for me, my favorite rom-com, and it's so sad too, A Walk to Remember with Mandy Moore. I remember just watching that, like it was just on VH1, and I was like, I might as well watch it. And I was like, this is the best thing ever. But I'm also like bawling my eyes out at the same time. I thought that was just a beautiful rom-com for me. I'm trying to think of some other ones, but like the early 2000s, they had a rom-com run.
Yes.
So I really want to bring that back. And just again, especially with during these times, you really just want to have that escapism and just trying to find some joy while you can, because if you just immerse yourself with realism, like modern day realism, you're going to be miserable. And it's like, I like to, especially at this time, because I'm in my 20s, and by the time I graduate, I got to put on my big girl panties, do work and pay these big people bills. I just want to bask in my youth and just live every moment while I can. I mean, me being in California is already just like, I find joy in that. Just like back in August, like packing my bags and just flying from Chicago, and it's like, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm staying with my cousins in Cyprus because grad school housing did not give me a room, so I'm about to just free ball until I find a solution. But I think just living in the moment and being present in the present is really big for me, and not having to worry about certain things and just finding that joy. And I think that's what really keeps me sane. And it's just like, I can choose my reality. Like, I'm choosing not to focus on the inauguration. I'm choosing not to focus on this presidency, because if I do, I might go insane. So it's like, let me just not, like, I don't have to think about it. And that's fine, because, again, other folks didn't think about what I was going through as a Black woman. So I'm going to just put the Uno reverse on you, and I'm not going to worry about what y'all are going through.
No, that's right.
Yeah, that's how I'm getting through life. So, and I enjoy every minute of it.
Yeah.
I love
People
that.
need that too. Like, we saw how people reacted to Wicked, and people made of romance just because they need that. They're starving for that.
More love.
More love.
More love.
More love. And also with music too. Like, do you feel that in your own music journey?
Yes. I think I only make music from the heart. My mom sent me this video like a week ago, and she was like, I need you to make sure you're making music from the heart. Like, not just for this world or your worldly ways. Make it from your heart because it'll touch other people's hearts. Because we really do need more love. We need to really live in our purpose, and I really want to do that through my music. So yeah, it's hard because I'm an awkward teenager and I really just found out what love is, but now I can tell other people and help relate to other people, and that's really what brings me together with anyone, really, just the conversation and the music and the vibes. Yes.
What's your process like in getting in touch with yourself when you're writing? Like when you're trying to come up with music, how do you really check in with self?
Girl, I feel that heartbreak first. I feel the heartbreak first, and then I think, how did I get from this? And that's where the good song comes out of. I really do have to relive my pain, which is fine because I know we all relive our trauma at some point, but also we think about how blessed we are to overcome that, even to be sitting in this space right now and being present in this moment. This is a part of the process for me, the experience. And writing, really, I treat it the same way as being a screenwriter. Is it's based off experience and then imagination from there. So that's exactly how I do when I write my music.
Nice.
That's good therapy too.
Yes.
That sounds like good therapy.
Journaling. Do y'all journal?
I do.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Does
Got to journal.
journaling ever make y'all more angry? Because it makes me more angry every time I journal.
To an extent.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, I have a different type of journaling. I used to do voice journaling. So like I would go on like my voice memos and just like whatever's on my mind, I gotta get it out. And like I've been doing this as a kid. I like to talk to myself just to be in my own little delusions, in my own little world, and just like whatever's on my mind, let me get it off by myself. And that's just like that's something therapeutic for me. It's just getting my own thoughts out and just knowing that like I'm my own comfort as well, and just getting everything that's just off my chest. I enjoy it a lot.
For me, when I journal, I kind of just like, I'll take whatever I'm going through and turn it into a story. Because I feel like I can address where I went wrong, you know, what I could have done differently, and then learn from that when I go back and read and like, you know what, the next time this situation arises, this is how I'm going to handle it. This is a better way to deal with it. And I think that's probably where I started out when it comes to like storytelling, story writing, just like rewriting what could have been, because like you can't redo the moment, but like you said, you can relive your trauma. So
No, that's also very therapeutic too. Like that's how I got into writing horror. And then I don't know if you had the experience, but you'll write something and your cohort will read it and they'll be like, wow, why would they do this to this person? I'm like, yeah, that would be crazy, right? You shouldn't do that, right? Ridiculous.
Heavy on the projecting.
Exactly. And then they're like, clearly this is personal for you. And I'm like, my bad. But yeah, absolutely.
like, is it personal or are you just perceived?
I know.
Okay.
I know.
know what's going on in my head.
I know. I could have an imagination. You don't know that.
To your question earlier about, Gabby, your question about the biographical films, I think it's difficult as far as like accuracy. 'Cause when it comes to biographical films, especially of important titular people from our community, I think you have to realize that whatever you're making will be the representation of their legacy for all time.
Yep.
We did not live through Martin Luther King's legacy. All I have is documentaries, newspapers, movies. So as a filmmaker, when you're taking on these incredible stories of these monumental people that, you know, sometimes are still around, sometimes are not, when you're making these, I think that it is important to consider how you're portraying them and leaving that legacy. And I do think that there can be a way to potentially use the tent poles of, I guess, story structure so that it doesn't feel like we're constantly getting hammered over the head with trauma, and we're constantly being reminded of how terrible everything was. In a grand scheme, for autobiographical, you have to really stick to the facts.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. And then with, like, for example, the death of Malcolm X, to me, evokes the same emotions that I remember feeling when I watched them beat Jesus in the Passion of the Christ. That is exactly how I felt. And I think that if you aren't trying to evoke the true emotional nature of the community and how it was back then and how we all felt and what it felt like, the shock, the surprise, I think we have this perception that when you get on the stage, when you get to a certain level of fame or even notoriety, from celebrities today to social activists of old, I think that we have this sense of comfort that they're on a stage, we can all see them, we see what's going on, we know they're safe, we know they're good. The government knows where we all live.
Yep.
And like you said earlier, the FBI posting MLK is crazy. Because it's like, are we supposed to just forget that you were tapping his house and threatening his wife and, disturbing the peace of a very
videotape.
Yes, it's like
It's like a documented fact.
Like, why don't you address how you approach someone who, at the time, let's make it clear, was an enemy of the state, and now that you realize what he was fighting for and realize how powerful that legacy is beyond the death, you have to address it as, what Coretta set it out to be. Because if she didn't do that work, it would just be, oh, he just died.
Yeah.
Like, he was just shot, and, like, his legacy, the work that he was doing, winning the Nobel Peace Prize, all of the work that he did on the ground floor would be probably seen as nothing more than a nightmare for the Black community. And I think Coretta had to do that work to make sure that it was remembered in the way that it should have been.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, to your point, I think that the lens with which you decide to do your film matters too, because with Rustin, it was interesting because I feel like if that movie was made like 15 years ago, the whole thing would be about the fact that he was gay. Like, the whole thing would be like, how can we milk the trauma of a gay Black male civil rights leader? Like, how can we like scandalize this or just make this the big thing? But what they instead showed was they didn't hide that it was such an important part of the story, but it almost feels like that probably would have been more accurate to how he experienced life. They were like, he's gay, he's a communist, and probably levied those two things against him almost equally. You could just tell that the story was done without the need to exploit anything that they would have seen as like sensational. So to your point, yes, I definitely think like so much of the filmmaker's intentions are always so clear, like in each of these films, for sure.
The beginning of Selma, I saw that movie in theaters when it first came out with my high school class, and I did not remember that being the opening. The way that they had the accuracy of Rustin getting beat when he got off of his bus boycott, as far as not the boycott, but the sitting in at the front, that's something, because of how they set up the scene, we were expecting to happen by the end of the scene. We knew what he was expecting, and I think with Selma, it's just like, okay, we're in the world. There's these little girls. They're talking. They're in church. They're having a good time. They're having a casual conversation the way that we are right now, and you don't expect for the entire scene to blow up in your face. And I think throwing your audience into that, it's one way to do it, but then you have to wonder, who is that for? Because I didn't feel good seeing that. So who are we making that traumatic experience? Who are we cultivating that for? And I think that that also should be something to think about when we come and we watch these types of films when they're addressing historic things. It's like, is this for us or is this about us?
I don't think there is like the proper way to do it, because I think that's a good opening scene just to like display like how extreme the violence went toward any black person. You know, like you said, you have young black girls who have nothing to do with, you know, these rhetorics. They're not harming, quote unquote. Again, what involvement do they have with, you know, the movement? They're just little girls, and then for them to be in that situation and for their lives to be gone like that, that's a great way to show like how extreme the racism was. But again, like you said, who in the audience is going to watch it? Because again, it's probably going to be, you know, us black folks supporting the black film, but at the same time, it's like, dang, we're 10 minutes in. I don't think I want to watch the remaining 90 minutes of this because I just got, you know, hit in the face with all this. Like, that's a lot. And I think it is a little bit difficult because you want that targeted audience to kind of like be comfortable, be uncomfortable with the, no, be comfortable with the uncomfortable. There we go. With, you know, what we go through. But again, it's frustrating because that's not their inconvenience. They can choose not to go to that because, again, it has nothing to do with them. It doesn't apply to them, but it does because your silence is enabling to add more to that in today's times. So I think the best way to go about it for, again, when displaying that is for folks to, they have to come to terms that there's going to be a day where you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable and understand, for us, it's just a regular Wednesday, which is, you know, it's frustrating that I have to say that, but again, that's what, you can't be mad for applying the things that you applied onto us, and we're putting it back onto you, and we're putting that mirror in your face. Because again, if you don't want to think or worry about that, well, how about we eliminate these rhetorics that were already instilled in the past? So it's like you have the problem right there, and you have the power to eliminate that. You're just choosing not to do that. So with that, okay, with your choice not to do that, I'm going to put that mirror in your face and let you know that this is the harm that you're doing and the enabling of that as well.
Right. And I think the intention behind that is very, very clear, but then it makes me wonder, like you said, we're the ones in the audience. We're definitely going to go see that movie if Ava DuVernay is putting it out.
Yeah.
And then it's like the goal is to hold up the mirror, but the people who need to look in the mirror aren't always going to want to see that. They're like, oh, it's a film about Martin Luther King. I don't know if I'm going to go see that. And I think, you know, those types of demographics, those insights, analytics are not available to the general public when it comes to the box office. But I think it's evidently clear when a black movie goes up in the theaters and the box office is up. We know who's in the theater. We know who's supporting that. And I think that you have to be sensitive to your audience and to know your audience at the same time. I went to a predominantly black and Mexican school. We saw that on our field trip. I just have to wonder how many other majority white schools were making sure that the students our same age were also going to a field trip to go see that movie. And it's like, are we putting the responsibility, I guess, on the viewer to do that work, to see the mirror and to, I think we should hold white audiences a lot more accountable to make sure that they're going to see the things, like you said, that are difficult, and they need to see what we have to see, what we want to see. We want to support these types of movies, but we don't want to be the only ones watching them.
And I think there's another way to go by it. I know with like the biographies and the biopics may not be the first go around, but I just keep thinking about Jordan Peele and how he kind of approaches racism. So like with Get Out, we're focusing on interracial relationships and how the black partner is being introduced to their, in this case, their white partner's world and how they go about things, and how, you know, some of these, you know, interracial couples, it's, you don't know what you're going to expect. And again, especially for that non-black partner, how are you tackling, or how are you going with your day-to-day life that you have a black partner? Are you acknowledging, are you going out your way to, you know, be empathetic, understand black history, understanding that, you know, the different capitas that we have to go through and how racism is instilled in every single capita. So, and I thought that was a really great way to go about that, because again, it's not their inconvenience. And it also made me think of another one with Sidney Poitier, Guess Who's Coming for Dinner, and with his character's partner, Joey, and how she was just kind of like oblivious to the fact that she has a black husband, and not coming to the fact that she herself is also going to deal with the repercussions that he has, having a white wife, with her having a black husband, and with both the characters' parents kind of like coming together. It's like, there's nothing wrong with you being in the couple, but because of your identities, not everyone's going to have the same reaction. And I mean, even with Sidney Poitier's, his character's father, he was not, he didn't, you would think the white parents would have that reaction, but it was actually the black parents were like, I don't know about this. But again, because that they've gone through that racism, it's going to be a lot different now that their son is with a non-black partner, and how that's going to be even more violent on them, because again, they're breaking that norm that was, you know, interracial relationships back then. That was not a norm that you typically see nowadays. So I think when you kind of go through the different complexities of the black identity, I think it could have a stronger hit and a stronger impact, because I like to think, it's very weird, but I like to think of the black identity as an onion. There's so many layers that we go through that not a lot of people know about, even with us as a community.
Yep.
So I think when you focus on different complexities of, you know, the black identity, rather than just, you know, flat out racism and, you know, this is going to be a movie about racism, I feel like that will have a stronger impact when you focus on a certain aspect that revolves around racism.
Agreed. That's why I think misdirection is such like a powerful tool when it comes to that, especially when you're talking about white and non-black audiences. Because I also think, as you were saying, who is going to watch Selma? Who is going to watch these things? I could see a white audience member going to movies like that, wanting to be like, and maybe in good faith being like, I'm a good person. I'm going to watch this movie, and oh, how horrible, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to leave. Okay, let me go on with my day. But I think if you're not bracing yourself for certain things, and then it comes at you through sideways, through humor, or through something that you weren't expecting, then you're stuck. You're forced to actually absorb this information, whereas you probably wouldn't have before. Like you were saying with Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, I was also watching The Jeffersons, which was a 70s show. And yes, I love The Jeffersons too. And I didn't realize they had an interracial couple on the show. And like you were saying, both George Jefferson and I forget who the white father's name is, but they both kind of had issues with it and stuff like that. And so it was one of those things that was a very interesting commentary for different reasons, but they were able to bond over their mutual hatred of their children's union. It was hilarious. They were calling the daughter Plaid, which was messed up. It was a lot. It was a lot. But through humor, they were able to actually have that conversation to a 70s audience, which it's not the first time they had that conversation, but it was really interesting.
Thank you so much for being here, Kennedy and Cameryn.
Thank you.
I wanted to pick up on a bit from Selma, something that Kennedy made me think about, and some of the last things that she was talking about with Who Came to Dinner, and what it means to be a non-Black partner in a relationship with a Black person. I think that it's important to understand that Black identity is not an easy one to live in, being in America. Mm-hmm. And I think that you have to embrace that as well as like you embrace the joys of the culture as far as Black culture. And I think Selma touched on that when they spoke on one of their allies. At the end, they said that she died 2 hours after driving Black voters to the booth. And I think it was really important to add her narrative to the story as a white ally and as a representation of what that looks like to be an ally to the community, regardless of romantic partnership. Just being someone who loves Black people the same way that you love anybody that you love in general. And I think that you have to expect to be treated in the same way that Black people are treated in this country when you stand for those rights that are being taken away. I think that you have to assume the same level of responsibility that we hold within our community, moving through those types of spaces and moving through life in general. I think, like Kennedy was saying, there is a expectation that you do the work and have the responsibility to inform yourself, to seek out those resources so that you are informed, and also that you're not putting that pressure on anybody, whether they're your romantic companion or a friend, and as a non-Black individual who is trying to be an ally. I think you need to do the work yourself, and I think that Selma shows that it is risky business out here, and they showed that in one of the pastors that came down. They showed that twice then in that movie, that this is what white allyship looks like. This is what it can look like at its worst, and at its most dangerous. But that is the fear that Black people have to endure on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. And to be an ally is to fully comprehend the level of stress in that situation. Like, it's not just, I'm going to post a Black tile on my page and, do a hashtag. It's really putting yourself in the shoes of the most vulnerable in the most physical way you can.
Mm-hmm. I think it's definitely really important to emphasize romantic or otherwise, because I definitely think there's been a trend of people kind of assuming they're part of the community, et cetera, and therefore part of all of the joys and the stress that comes with it just via romantic partnership with a Black person. I think we've seen this a lot. So I think that in terms of definitely stressing that romantic partnership does not equal allyship. You can be an ally and be romantically involved with a Black person, but being romantically involved does not make you an ally, especially because we've seen so many situations where people are oh, well, I'm with a Black person. I'm that doesn't mean you're not racist. what is that? And then even worse, then you could be having children and subjecting them to all this familial trauma and stuff. So very interesting misconception. And also, in terms of white allyship, it's interesting to see what is portrayed as allyship in movies with white directors versus movies with black directors, because I do like about Selma is there are other movies that, especially civil rights era movies, where there's always like a white person who's like, this is wrong, and like all the other white people are like, how dare you, but the white person is like then beloved and everything goes like, and they might have like a very impactful speech, but like that's kind of the extent of it. But showing like, oh, okay, if you want to be an ally, that is actually what that entails. You are putting your life and body on the line just like everybody else does. And so seeing who the actual allies who are actually embraced are, like I think of John Brown. There was like during the civil rights era, 2 white men and 1 black man were killed in a protest, I believe. And the white men were in solidarity with the black man, and like that is actually what that entails. Like that is the extent of it, not just, you know, waving your fist and being like, this is wrong, and then all of a sudden you're the main character of the story. Like that is, it's a far cry from reality. So in terms of Selma, I did like how they did it, because sometimes I think they do center white allies in stories just to soften the blow. They're like, see, there were white people. We're not saying white people are bad, but
Right, it's like not all white people.
exactly. So you actually can't get mad at this movie. So yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting approach by Ava in her storytelling, and how she decided to portray that, like the where are they now at the end of the movie type thing. It's like, well, you know, we know what happened to the pastor or the priest that came.
Exactly.
As unfortunate as that was, I think even that scene with them throwing slurs that are usually thrown at black people to white allies, and just they slap the word white in front of it as if, you know, it just, they can completely change whatever the meaning they want of the slurs.
Yeah. And I think that's such a huge part of it, is that like it's such a evolving form of oppression. It can like morph to whatever is fitting at the moment. And so it always can shift and change. And I feel like we see this now. Like people can change definitions, people can change things just to fit this ideology. So it's never just about whatever the details are. It's always about the hatred. That's what's always going to be the constant. But yeah, it was an interesting way of portraying that. I think I overall liked it. Because at first I was like, I guess they're going to show like white people cared too. And it's like, that's fine. But I did like the turn that they took.
What did you think about the portrayal of Martin as a martyr or as not a martyr in Selma?
It's interesting, honestly, because I feel like his portrayal was, you know, really good, really impactful. But I think it was honestly almost a little bit more one note than some. Like, for some reason, if I'm remembering correctly, I think Betty and Coretta kind of had a more nuanced kind of take on, or honestly, I would say maybe Rustin had the most nuanced take on Martin Luther King, I would probably say. So, the one thing I didn't like about Betty and Coretta was they both were kind of, I remember Malcolm X's speech was like, I know I'm going to die. That was, But, yeah, I mean, I thought it was beautiful, but it was a little one note to me. What do you think?
I was getting less of the Martin who, I guess the version that our friend Martin tried to portray to students who saw the movie at that time. Whereas like he, I mean, was a martyr, but like in those types of like in the portrayal that they did in our friend Martin, I think it was more of the martyr version, like when he goes back in at the end. it gives this had to happen in order for a better future.
Yeah, like a sacrificial lamb type of situation.
Right. And then they have, they show how the world is and like how it didn't change, really. Like nothing changed, just things, I guess, the world kept moving, but it didn't change because of Martin. To say that he died for a cause that we're watching be repealed through law
Yeah.
currently it's like I can't abide by the rhetoric that he died for something. Like
No.
people talk about Jesus like he died for our sins, and he fought for our rights. He didn't die for our rights. He died because of racism.
Yeah, because he was assassinated.
Right. Like it wasn't, his work was not finished.
No, it was not.
That's
No, it
my
was not.
opinion.
And also, I mean, we can even see how in Betty and Coretta Scott King continues his work. And even then, we still have so much work. So his work definitely isn't finished. And I agree. Our Friend Martin was a very interesting rewatch because I do remember watching it in elementary school. And at the time, the only thing I took away from it was, wow, like there was a scene where it's like you don't want to give someone ice cream or something. I was like, wow, that's messed up. But and even as a child, I thought it was a little weird for a couple of points. One is Miles, at least from my understanding in the beginning, just like like a lot of it was proving to him like this is what racism was like, assuming that they kind of live in like a post-racial society. I think someone at Miles's age probably would have experienced racism then anyway. So I think I understand what the purpose of, showing like kids decades after the civil rights movement being more apathetic about it and wanting to learn their history. That's important. But being like, see how bad things once were is good too. But also assuming like the world was racist and now it's not. And so you have to be grateful for Martin Luther King. And also showing how to them, like, and it's for kids. So I have to keep remembering that. But like the racism that they did experience was so cartoonish. Like, so like, I hate you. And they're like pointing and stuff like that. And it's like, I don't know. I think it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. Not the people who employ it, but just the way it evolves and stuff. But yeah, I agree. And also the very altruistic way that they paint Martin Luther King, because I think there have been a lot of narratives of, him preaching nonviolence as just a beautiful altruistic philosophy, but it was a strategic decision. Like, it was trying to figure out how is it going to be most effective for us to actually get the things we need. And so I think watching Rustin was also good too, because learning that like Bayard Rustin, one of the proponents of nonviolent resistance and why he did. Because even if I don't fully agree with just nonviolent resistance, I can see the logic of it and really just being like, we just want, it is a means to an end. Like, we need to achieve the things we need to achieve, and this is how we would do it.
So Betty and Coretta was a new one for me.
Same.
Very, very interesting seeing those two be juxtaposed and compared, and their stories being told in such a parallel way. I didn't know as much about Betty or Coretta's journey after the death of their husbands. So this was a really insightful film for me.
No, it was definitely insightful. Especially because I just didn't know that much about Betty Shabazz as a person in general. Like, I knew like tertiary details about Coretta Scott King, but one, at least in my school, they don't teach about Malcolm X in elementary school. But yeah, they didn't teach about Malcolm X in elementary school. So again, that was something I just learned from my family. But yeah, so I didn't know that much about Betty Shabazz as a character. I mean, as a person, before, or just like what I had just learned on my own. So that was interesting. But also, I think just like how things continued, and also knowing that the civil rights movement did not end in 1968. You know, it didn't end in the 60s. Because I also think that we separate things into the civil rights movement of the 60s, the Black Power movement of the late 60s and 70s, and then quote unquote post-racial America, which so
Whatever that means.
Yeah, whatever that means. Don't know what that is. Never heard of her. So yeah, it was definitely eye-opening for me. Also, I didn't know that they were friends. I also looked it up afterwards because I'm like, how much of this is
real or not?
Yeah, because they said like some of it's based on the truth, some of it's not. The only thing I found was that both of the families were not happy with their portrayals, which was interesting to me because I feel like they did like a very a fairly nuanced portrayal of both of them. But that's your family. You are allowed to feel however you want to feel. You know them. I don't. Yeah, that was the only thing that I've really found. So I'm not sure how much of it is true. I mean, obviously the conversations are, imagined, but learning how these two women did, at least in this film, support each other, and also how Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were not like ideological opponents. Like none of these people were opponents. We're not against each other. Like
regardless of what they try to teach us,
exactly,
they were in opposition and they were completely fighting two different fights.
Exactly.
I think looping in the women in their lives and the full narrative, I think, rounds it out, so that you understand that they were fighting the same fight.
Yep.
They had two different approaches, obviously. And I think I also didn't know much about Betty, a little bit about Coretta, but I was taught about Malcolm X briefly in school. But what was taught was that he was essentially a violent radical. And I think that they conflated the late Black Panther movement with Malcolm X.
Yes, they definitely
tried to tie those groups together,
yes,
as
they
if
did.
he led the Black Panthers.
Yeah.
I think in history classes, they don't openly talk about his affiliation with the Nation of Islam.
Yeah.
No one wants to talk about, especially during the early 2000s.
Yes.
Nobody really wants to talk about anything Islamic.
Yeah.
In Chicago, there's a huge community of Black Muslims on the South Side where I'm from. It is so prevalent in the South Side that you have to know who Malcolm X is.
Yeah.
Like you can't bring up civil rights without talking about Malcolm X. You cannot bring up Malcolm's fight and Martin's fight without putting them in the same conversation.
Yeah, they're tied together.
They're linked forever. And I think understanding that they're linked forever is to also understand that Betty and Coretta are linked forever. While it might not have been true that they were friends or whatnot, I think it was healing for me.
Yeah, agreed.
To see them together in the way that they were together. Like the scene where the Shabazz family and the King family get together and they're at Betty's house. There's moments of Black joy there.
Yeah.
And we see Betty dancing with her 6 daughters, which didn't even know that Malcolm had 6 daughters.
Yeah.
And to know that she had to raise 6 kids on her own after his passing.
And her grandchild.
Yeah.
Yep.
She was really, really one of the strongest women in the community, probably still to this day. Maintaining on your own as a parent, as a single mother, and then having the weight of the entire world and the community that was supposed to support you as far as the Nation of Islam bashing your husband's legacy because they didn't agree with his change of heart after he journeyed to Mecca. Once he decided that he wasn't going to be preaching anti-white rhetoric or racist rhetoric after his very diverse journey to Mecca, and he opened his mind and his heart, that the Nation of Islam then turned their backs on his family. And I think a lot of people were expecting the nation to still have, you know, Betty's best interest in heart, the same way that society expected, you know, the Black community to uplift Coretta and the King family. And I think to know that they were abandoned by on multiple fronts is really heartbreaking, because they were fighting the same fight. And I think as a community, seeing what happened to Malcolm X, seeing what happened to King, I think put a lot of us in a state of shock and fear to the point where we're scared to even talk about him anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to that point, because I didn't learn about Malcolm X in elementary school, but we did talk about him in high school, and they conflated him with the Nation of Islam and basically conflated him with Farrakhan, and basically never talked about how they parted ways and like everything that came from that. And so anything that was incendiary, anything that was controversial and provocative, either from the Black Panther Party or from the Nation of Islam, in school we learned that Malcolm X was associated with anything inflammatory that comes from any of those groups. So it was definitely eye-opening for sure. I mean, these were things I knew, but I hadn't seen portrayed. And it's so interesting that this is like a Lifetime movie. It's not like a prestige movie like Selma or anything like that. It wasn't nominated for any Oscars, but I think it did a really good job of, not a perfect job, but a good job of portraying the things that the holes in our history that we haven't seen on screen. And to your point about how the communities failed, both Betty and Coretta, I think it's so sad that it's so par for the course. And I think in terms of just these movements and in general, women, especially Black women, are always seen as collateral for anything. Like, it is assumed we will help, and it is assumed it will be ignored whatever happens to us afterwards. And I feel like part of the reason why, like even saying before, I didn't know that Coretta Scott King was responsible for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, was because after both were assassinated, it's like, okay, well, we're not going to pay attention to these women anymore. Like, all we know of them are that they're grieving wives, not that they disagreed with their husbands, which is interesting in terms of Betty Shabazz's character, where she honored her husband, but also she, you know, disobeyed his idea of women staying in the home, and she wanted to help women outside the home, and she did so much. And even in the brief moment of Nelson and Winnie Mandela, which was interesting too, and they were talking about how Winnie Mandela embraced Betty Shabazz, knowing knowing what I've heard and learned, that Winnie Mandela was more, in many senses, more radical than Nelson Mandela, or wanted him to be more radical. And so seeing like these women weren't only like the people who support their community, but they also had different ideals. They all believed in these causes, but they also had their own opinion and their own way of carrying them out that may have been different from what their husbands wanted. It was really cool to see. I wish this was not like the only film I've seen about this.
Something that stuck out that's probably not real, but was important to include, in my opinion, the part where Coretta is recommending to Betty that Quabella see a therapist because her children are in therapy.
Yeah.
And Betty says no. I don't know how accurate that is as far as who felt like they needed therapy or who felt like they didn't need therapy. I think that it's an important conversation to have as a community in general. And I think using Coretta and Betty as those maternal figures and knowing how much trauma those kids went through and having that open discussion of like, my child is struggling and we've been through this traumatic thing, and like, you think that talking to your girlfriend is enough.
Yeah.
But you talking to your girlfriend about it does not change how your child is taking in the world and taking in the input of the world and how they're dealing with it. And I think that it was very important that they had that conversation, even if it wasn't real.
Yeah.
I think that it is extremely important, especially given Quibilla's story.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you what you thought about, you know, her decision on leaving Princeton. And that, you know, Malcolm said that education is a passport to the future. That's what Betty said that he said.
Yeah.
But I think they showed a lot of nuanced things in just that quick little scene.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
So, yeah, I also think it was really interesting. It was something that I saw and also kind of resonated with when watching, because we see the fallout of that, like between Quibilla and her son, Betty Shabazz's grandson. We see the effects of generational trauma passed down through 3 generations, and how that goes, how that happens, and not through, I think, lack of intervention. I mean, I feel like the characters did the best they could, but also I understand, like, philosophies in terms of therapy are very nuanced, I think, especially then versus now. But yeah, I remember even in the earlier parts when Quibilla was just a kid, and I remember, like, she was struggling so much more than her siblings, and she was having nightmares and she was flashbacks. I'm like, this child has PTSD. I know. I have PTSD. I know it, like, she has PTSD. That's what's going on. And I think that's another thing that we just really do forget about the fallout of these situations, because it's not just 2 men, it's entire communities who not only had to deal with the trauma of all of the injustices they face, but also the trauma of fighting against those injustices. And oftentimes the fighting is what causes the explosion. Not that it shouldn't happen, but that's when people, if you're complacent, then most times people don't have to exert all of their power against you. But when you fight back, that's when things get extremely ugly. And so seeing that, and then also her not going to Princeton, it's one of those things where I was like, no, don't do it. But also, it is one of those things that's difficult too, because if she's dealing with these things, and also knowing how, one, they portrayed her father in media, but also in institutions like Princeton, in these, in Ivy League institutions, in school, in universities all over, and how oftentimes I feel like, because the place I talked about Malcolm X the most was in college. I think people like, especially Malcolm X, even more so than Martin Luther King Jr., in my opinion, their lives are just used for ideological debates as opposed to real life conversations. And I could imagine how difficult it must be for the children of somebody, and now you have to go to school and hear like some random person from Wisconsin who wants to be a philosophy major trying to have a Socratic method debate or something with you about your own father. Like, that would be crazy. That would be so enraging, and people still do it now. I can't judge her decisions. I hate what happens to her character. I just think she was in an impossible situation. What do you think?
I think the school being Princeton speaks a lot to the education system socially when it comes to America at the highest level, especially at PWIs.
Yes.
And what that looks like and the experiences that come with being a radical in a PWI or aware in general, and holding people accountable. And I don't necessarily think that that's what she was doing. I think it's more of what you're talking about and the legacy and being a legacy kid in that way. It probably was extremely frustrating. But then it makes me wonder, I have to wonder, how different would her life have been if she went to an HBCU? And how differently she would have been received by her community. And those Socratic discussions by a philosophy major at a, school like Howard or, literally any HBCU, I think it makes you wonder, like, how much, obviously, I know that the impact of going to a PWI, not finishing at a PWI or deciding to not continue with school, the pullback from that type of institution, I think, can be damaging to the ego and the spirit and the mind, because it feels like I've gotten to the highest point and it's not for me. This is not crafted for me. This is not well thought out for me.
It feels like no one misses you when you're gone either. It's like you were never there.
Yeah. So I don't blame her at all for, after however many weeks she was at Princeton, decided that she didn't want to do that no more. I do think that she deserved a space that made her feel comfortable in getting her education, and it was a disservice to, I guess, encourage her to go to that type of a school. And then it's like you have to wonder, like, how much is, I'm running away from something, or am I running towards, making sure that there's space for me, for people in my community at this PWI. And I think that we have to be sensitive to ourselves and what our journeys are and what that looks like and how we're received based on, like you said, for her, it's legacy, but like just the kind of person either that you're becoming while you're at school or that you've always been, and making sure that you're in an environment that really fosters positive growth.
Yeah. And also I think because like that, like hypothetical of these students at Princeton, stuff like that, I think institutions love to court smart Black people who will not only look excellent on a brochure, but great on a panel, et cetera, and are somehow always surprised when said people take issue with the school and how these things are going, et cetera. It's just, and I think it also goes back to the sort of false memory of Martin Luther King, that he was this smart, like, moral man who, like, got along with white people. Like, white people hated him. They killed him. Like, what? How much more can you hate someone? Like, they did not like this man. He constantly angered this nation. Like, what do you mean? And so I think that there's this idea of the Black intellectual who's also docile, and I don't think those two can coexist. You can't coexist. If you are truly, like, cognizant of what's going on, you can't. Like, that doesn't even make any sense. And so I feel like schools, PWIs, always fall into that trap of, well, I want to get a select amount of Black people who will make us look good because they're so smart and they're so interesting and they have these things that will make us look so cool. Then why are they mad at us 2 years later or a year later or whatever? Like, what are you expecting?
And the fact that the government didn't just instate a holiday for Martin. Says a lot, and that Coretta had to push for it.
Exactly.
And it says so much that Betty couldn't, in her lifetime, get even the smallest amount of recognition for Malcolm X. And that it, well, based on the movie, I don't know if this is true, based on the movie, Coretta was the one that pushed to make sure that he got at least a stamp.
Yeah.
As far as, like, if you go and you want to look up U.S. stamps or buy U.S. stamps.
Yep.
Malcolm X's face is on a stamp, and like you have these huge juxtapositions to Martin having a holiday where people don't work, and statues and monuments all over this country, and we have one postal stamp
that Coretta Scott King had to fight for.
Yeah,
because she lent, quote unquote, respectability to Malcolm X. And that's the crazy thing too, is that like they sanitized the image of Martin Luther King so much and Coretta that then by lending her support, that's how they're able to get representation and recognition for Malcolm X. But it's not even like, I don't know. And we've seen it so many times, like, I don't know, at least on the internet and life, there will be non-black people, not just even white people, who will invoke Dr. King and be like, well, he wouldn't want this. How do you know what he would have wanted?
I thought it was interesting how the FBI was threatening to blackmail Martin from getting the Nobel Peace Prize. That was news to me.
Yeah, I didn't know about the Peace Prize part.
Yeah, I think him getting that was a threat to their plan to assassinate him.
Yeah.
And having him be awarded for peace created a huge moral quandary for the country. And the FBI notably having such a heavy hand in trying to control his ability to get our causes recognized nationally.
Yeah.
Beyond nationally, beyond just the U.S. I think the Nobel Peace Prize is everybody. Everybody knows, like, this person is fighting for good things. We can all be in agreement on that. And America not being in alignment with that,
it's a bad look.
It's just like, okay, where are our morals at this point?
It's a very bad look, especially because I see it like with parallels to apartheid in South Africa, with entire nations condemning what's going on. Like, it just makes you look terrible, especially because, as you said, it's an international thing. You award Martin Luther King Jr. with the Nobel Peace Prize. People are already, and also because the broadcasts of these protests and people being hosed down and beaten and all these other things are not just echoing throughout America. People are seeing them across the world. And then following that, this man gets a Nobel Peace Prize. And also that's the thing, too, for me, where, again, back to people sanitizing his image of nonviolence, it was, so much of that was strategic, because seeing images of people going limp and then still being beaten, which is a huge sacrifice. I do not know if I would, it's that's a lot. But like having people across the world see those images and see that on TV, and then getting the award for peace, and then someone is assassinated, like, that is, yeah, it's crazy.
What did you think about Betty Shabazz admitting, or finally saying, I guess, the quiet part out loud about how she felt Louis Farrakhan was the murderer? As a kid, I used to go to a park that was like across the street from Louis Farrakhan's house. He has a very large house in Hyde Park, and like knowing that he was such a prominent figure in the Black Muslim community, especially on the South Side of Chicago. Hearing that accusation written into the script was news to me.
Yeah, that was bold.
Yeah, I did not know that was in question.
Yeah.
Or if people were assuming that to the point where they would include it in a script and have it greenlit.
Yeah,
no way.
Absolutely. And that was another thing that I was like, did this happen? Did she say this on TV? I need to look this up, because when I looked up what the family thought, they didn't refute that in the article. Maybe it was just a not super comprehensive article. But I feel like that would be the first thing. If the family was like, she did not say this is not true, I feel like that would be the first thing they would say. So on TV too, because I remember she was on a segment, I was like, if this happened, which I feel kind of embarrassed that I don't even know for sure whether she said that on TV or not, that is, I'm like, this, I would just be so afraid for her life, like, if that is what's going on. And also, like, that is yet another thing they didn't teach us in school, or at least didn't teach me. It just leaves so many questions, like, where, like, how do people even settle that in their mind? Because
like, where was that a rumor back in the day?
Like, is this something that was just widely understood or talked about or questioned? Because nobody told me that.
Yeah, like, obviously from, what was it, 3 depictions from all the movies that we had of Malcolm X's murder, there were at least 3 or 4 or 5 people involved in the assassination, and none of those depictions were Louis Farrakhan. So for that to be an accusation in the script from Betty Shabazz, I think, there should be definitely some further research into the Black Muslim community, the Nation of Islam, on what the social narrative was like at that time.
Yeah.
And how were people questioning, and, like, who were they blaming? Everybody wants to point a finger, even though, in Spike Lee's Malcolm X, they caught somebody. I don't know if that's true either.
Yeah,
they got a physical hold of at least one person. But then another, I don't even remember which one of the films, but like there was several accusations of different people within the Nation of Islam. Like, it wasn't like, oh, the government did this, which was from Martin.
Yeah.
And we know that the government did that, and it wasn't just the government, but, like, racist sects of the government that had their hands in that assassination. But when it comes to Malcolm X, I think it's safe to say that people feel like the call came from inside the house as far as the Black community is concerned. Like, Black people killed Malcolm X versus we know white people killed Martin. And I think that's not talked about enough.
No, it's not. And it's interesting as well, because whose image did they sanitize? The person they killed. Like, it's so strange. You would think that the person who they've decided to rebrand, but I guess that's part of why they could rebrand him, because it's the people who kill people who get to ultimately, basically kill someone, who get to try to retell their story. And it's up to everyone else who was witness and who does pass down the stories to correct that narrative and to stand against that narrative. But it's, if you compared the two stereotypes and misconceptions of these figures, I would not think that Martin Luther King would be the one that the government, the FBI killed. Like, and I think it just, I don't know if there's anything in that. I don't know if it means anything. It may not. It may just mean that both of these people were up against multiple groups. And also the fact that Malcolm X started to create his own group, his own brotherhood, basically, breaking off from the Nation of Islam.
Transitioning to the Malcolm X film by Spike Lee, I think the telling of his life was it really illustrated how he became who he was, and in a way that like isn't talked about at all, like his journey, his personal journey, the whole first act of his life before he became the Malcolm X that the world knows. He was a very different person.
Yeah.
He was very young in that first act, and I think that being a foster child, being a child of the foster care system, and then being incarcerated, and being incarcerated for the reason that he was incarcerated for. It wasn't for robbery, even though that's what they were caught doing. It was for having sex with white women. And how losing your freedom as a black man to having sex or having relations with a white woman can inform the foundation of the way that you look at your country. And if you don't acknowledge that was his experience, and that he didn't start off crazy racist, how people want to describe him as, he was literally, I'm not going to say that it was obviously a fetish when it comes to white women, when he was dating white women.
And I think
it wasn't like, I love this, I love, like it was like.
And also it's just like, so many men of that time too, Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte, et cetera, like disappointing, but okay.
Right. I don't remember if they talked about it in that film in particular, but it was talking about like trying to, no, they did, because they talked about his mom, and his mom being like resenting her appearance. And then he discussed like I guess his father's mentality of like why she ended up with him, and it was, I guess, to run away from the perceived of what she was perceived as, and like it was really lightly touched on. Like it was kind of saying that when you are a part of the black community, even by one drop, you're a part of the black community. And people who are in that fringe tend to throw themselves deeper into the black community because that's my community. And I think that some people assume that people who have that one drop likely were to go off and pass and completely ignore that one drop as best as they possibly could. And it was important to note that his mom was adamant about her identity. And his dad being a preacher, I don't know if people know that. I didn't know that. I was like, if your dad is a preacher, that makes sense. Why you were Malcolm X.
Yeah, exactly.
Why you were able to just get up there and talk and really speak from the heart. And that, that story about his childhood home getting burnt up and how they were treating his dad, and that they literally made his death look like a suicide. So that they couldn't get insurance money and his family couldn't be taken care of.
And also the stigmas of suicide at that time too, to try to make him look and appear weak, you know.
Is the demasculinization of the black man. And they emphasized that, Spike emphasized that as he was saying, I'm a man. Like, you can't just come and burn my house up. Like, I'm going to stand here. I've got my gun. I'm standing for my wife and my kids. Like, you can't come and tell me that I'm a boy and then keep being racist. And I think his father being so determined to make sure that was known for the people that was threatening, their livelihoods, that it was too much for them to just let him, I guess, figure out how to take care of his family after his house was burned down. Like, the goal was to break the spirit of this preacher man and his family, and affect the community. We didn't get to see the community's response to his father dying. And we got to see Malcolm's.
Exactly. And it has parallels to Selma, with what happened with the white pastor, where it's like, I think it's not lost on me that religious people are not only spared, but are only not spared, but also targeted. And it's also, especially during that time, like the importance that the church had. That is to not only, as you're saying, break their spirit and the community spirit, but it's like also to shake people's religious faith as well. Because if the person who's supposed to be communicating with God and has a congregation is now, and especially because of the religious implications of suicide and the religious conversations about suicide and how it can be viewed and stuff like that, to have this religious leader die in a way that is frowned upon in Christianity at that time.
Absolutely.
Like the layers, and you could tell like the thought behind it as well.
That absolutely had to have influenced his change, like his ability to just be open to a new religion when he was in prison, because Jesus didn't come save my dad when the house, was on fire. Our house still burned up. Nobody came to come save him from being on the train tracks and, dying the way that he did. And I think the Black Christian community don't like to acknowledge Black people who were Christians at some point, but were so traumatized out of their faith that it just is nonsensical. Yeah. And I think that they do like to turn the cheek on people who cannot just, I'm just going to keep taking, whatever trauma, whatever abuse that I'm experiencing, and just chalk it up to God and let God deal with it, let Jesus take the wheel. Not everybody can rationalize their pain that way. And it's like you have to get to a certain point in pain level when you realize that's not my God, that's not my Savior. And that's where Malcolm was before he took on a new faith.
I think trauma can drive you towards and away from religion for sure. And also I think that like it is one of those complicated things as well, because of the not only religious but functional and practical purpose of the Black church at that time, the center of community since the end of slavery, like how important it was, not just from a religious aspect, but a social, strategic, mental health aspect, et cetera, et cetera. And so what do you do when you feel like you can't follow what people are saying, and this is the center for so much of your community's life? What do you do? And also, especially because what do you do if the same religion you follow is the same religion that your oppressors follow?
Hello.
And especially because your oppressors also use the same passages, or maybe different, but like use the same book to justify slavery and oppression, especially because they're in certain sects discouraging that questioning. Because I think the questioning is important. Like I was very lucky because I grew up with 3 religions in my family, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So I got to learn a lot and also question a lot, and it was like not discouraged. But I also think that we, especially during that time, I feel like recreating forms of hierarchy over and over again, and you're not allowed to question those hierarchies, of course people are going to turn away from that. They could either turn towards it or away from it, and it's not surprising that maybe he turned away from it.
I also grew up with exposure to multiple religions. I was exposed to Christianity, Baptist Christianity, Hebrewism, and Islam through my community, through my family, and otherwise just in general, like
Yeah.
you go to school, like learn a couple of things, but it's very different to know people personally who are devout and who firmly believe in what they believe in, and to have to respect that other people's beliefs are different than yours.
Yeah.
And I think that people who don't have exposure to people of other religious backgrounds are done a disservice.
They are.
They don't know how to interact or deal with people who have different beliefs without becoming, I'm going to say offensive.
Yeah.
A lot of things.
Exactly. And it's funny because it's like people ask you, I don't know if they ever asked you or like your family these questions, but like, each of my parents celebrates a different religion. And they're like, well, how can they coexist? What kind of question is that? You don't have friends of other religions? Like, that's weird. I don't understand that. But yeah, like, I think that it's not the same everywhere, but I think some of that urge to assimilate, at least in terms of religion, has dissuaded a little bit, at least in where I was and where I grew up. But I can't imagine if all of your life is centered around that, what do you do? And yeah, and then also like, and if you explore a new religion, you go to Mecca and stuff like that, and your opinion of some of the things that you thought changes. Like, I don't understand why there was just so much pressure to assimilate always. Always. Okay, Malcolm X left the church. Okay, he joined the Nation of Islam. All right, he started to disagree with some things. Like, why must you always follow some type of doctrine? And I feel like we set ourselves up as a community forcing people to do that. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. People are always looking to hold on to something. And I think most of the people are actually looking for community and not the doctrine.
Yeah.
I think there need to be more spaces that are free of doctrine and just communal spaces. We need more of those in our community. With Malcolm switching his religions, I think that it's important to also talk about his anti-whiteness and why he was so racist against white people. And I think most people, I didn't know that not only was he a foster care child, he was essentially a transracial adoptee.
Yeah.
And, if you're a transracial adoptee and you are not put in a position for success, it can be extremely damaging in those developmental years. And after he was removed from his mom's house, after his father was murdered, and she was forced to take care of her children as best as she could, he was put in schools that were all white. And he was not treated fairly, and his dreams were, squashed upon. And he was held to a lower standard than his peers. And I think that part of our society should also be addressed. And how being a transracial adoptee can spark radicalism.
To be a transracial adoptee as a child, especially after the trauma he faced.
Like, he had a whole life before
that. Exactly. And also, how do you deal with those feelings, especially as a young Black boy, like as a young Black male child? Like, how do you have those feelings? Because you're going to be angry at some point. Is his white family going to deal with his anger? How are they if at all, how are they going to perceive his anger? Are they going to let him be angry? Probably not. And therefore, what happens when you can't even express how you feel? Because your family and your school are policing your emotions so much, you can't even like let out the things that you probably need to let out. So yeah, I think that it's funny because I think there's this narrative that, oh, Malcolm X hated white people. He was only ever around Black people. He never blah, blah. It's like he was around white people a lot. A lot. It wasn't ignorance that informed his opinion. It was familiarity.
Yep. Absolutely. I think the proximity to whiteness gives you enough information on how they move through life, and then you can do nothing but compare how you move through life.
Yeah.
And by being someone who was in prison, by being someone who witnessed, you know, the government fallout of what it means to lose your father in such a tragic way, meaning the entire family needs to be separated now. Once we remove the man, once we remove the black father from the household, now the house has to be dissipated to the point of it's not a unit anymore.
Yeah.
And all of these compartments are the parts of America that we don't want to look at.
Yeah.
And because he went through all of those things, he has a very strong perspective on the system. And from his perspective, being a black man, there's no way out of the system that he was
so the
put
system
in.
must be done away with.
Yes. So if you aren't thinking about his whole life experiences and you're just chalking it up to, when he met Elijah Muhammad, he became, you know, when he met the man that he met in prison, that he became Malcolm X. Malcolm X was a budding individual when he was a child. His opinions were forming of the society that he lived in from a child, and he went through life, and it didn't even hit him until probably late 20s when he made that drastic change. He was in prison still perming his hair. And it's just like you have to understand that this person had several chapters to his life, and again, like Martin, his work was not finished.
No.
He was still figuring it out and figuring out his belief system and like where he fit into everything.
Yeah. And also it's like there could also be resentment and just pent up frustration at sort of being cut off from your community in terms of socialization. How do you move forward as an activist, as a man, as a person, if so many of your formative years have been spent in white community, being ostracized? Like, how do you do that? How do you reconnect with your own people? And like we see this in terms of conversations of like kids who go to PWIs from like childhood and stuff like that, people who go to quote unquote good neighborhoods, even talking about his daughter Kabila going to Princeton. Like, what does that do in terms of your ability to connect with your own people in your, and then if you cut people off from their community, not only in the practical sense, but in their mental sense, they're feeling that they can and should connect with their confidence and their ability to.
And I think we often don't talk about the prison to Nation of Islam pipeline that they had going on, which is cool for reintegration within the community, you know, getting people on their feet and whatnot. But you also have to let people grow beyond the doctrine once it's offered. You can't then shackle someone to beliefs that they have grown out of. And I think Malcolm's pilgrimage to Mecca pretty much changed his entire approach to the race issue and the race problem that America has. And he came back, not only changed, but he had a goal, which I didn't know this was the goal.
Yeah.
He had the goal of charging the U.S. with their mistreatment of Black Americans to the UN.
Yeah.
Before they assassinated him. So to know that he had obviously very big plans, and they were snuffed out because from what that movie was illustrating, like they were upset that he was gaining too much fame, popularity, and also Elijah Muhammad said that he was making it hard for Muslims with some of the things he was saying, which I don't disagree. some of the things he was saying was making it difficult. Like when he talked about someone was assassinated, and he said like they had it coming, something like that. And that like it was chickens coming to roost, right? So he was just saying that like don't talk about the person that the country loved this man, and they put him on that 90-day silencer. And I believe that I heard, I don't think from the movie, that he did not follow the rule, and he still spoke out, which pissed the nation off completely because he had orders. It's really frustrating because I think watching both of these men on their missions be cut short, they were so young.
Yeah, they were very young.
And the missions were cut short as well. And it kind of dissipated into different things that did not prevail over time, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the Black nationalist movement and the civil rights movement that was led by Martin were indefinitely a spiritual movement for the Black community. Whether, whatever religion that you ascribe to, there was an uplifting of the spirit of Black people that was happening on the nonviolent front. And I don't think Malcolm X was violent. I don't remember him ever hitting anybody or beating anybody's ass or sicking dogs on people or, opening fire hoses. Yeah, so I think as simply as we can comprehend sports and what defense is and what offense is, I think at this point we should be able to be in agreement that Malcolm X was for the defense of Black people, and Martin was for the education of white Americans who were interested in listening and learning. And I think that those two missions together could have changed something.
Yeah. I think what they were able to accomplish in their short lives did change some things. I think they could have changed more had they lived longer. And I think that everything is just unfortunately so cyclical. I think that, especially following the Black Power movement, I feel like people had this era of rest, which is fine, people should rest. But I think then we were led into, because when I was watching My Friend Martin, I was thinking of post-racial America, because that's kind of what they were trying to say. And then that was kind of what followed, when actually it was supposed to be a resurgence of what was being done before. I do think that people should protect themselves, they should preserve themselves, they shouldn't burn out. But I felt like the decreased activity following these movements should have been just a point of rest and recollecting to reassess what needs to be worked on and to push for that. And I know people did do that. I know that people did. But to the scale and the notoriety that we know, not necessarily. And it really feels like there were some touch points in the 90s with the LA riots, and then there were some touch points in the early 2000s, and then the Black Lives Matter movement of the 2010s is the closest we've had to a full resurgence. And even that had this boom and bust cycle.
It was viral, it was trendy,
it was viral,
and it wasn't planned the entire way.
And social media now, it's just so much of life is lived online that it feels like movements take place online, and it's not. And I think online is so good for the internet is so good for organizing, but it does not replace real life. It does not replace in-person activism. It's part of activism, absolutely. But it is not, I think, because we live so much online, we think if we do activism online, it's the same. No.
Yeah. I agree with you. A lot has changed because of the two of them. I believe that if they worked together,
Oh yeah.
At any point in time. They, you know, I think the moment that Malcolm X started becoming less polar opposite in his thinking, they could have linked up and met in some middle, because I disagree wholly with the getting beat and getting shit poured on.
Yeah. It's not for me.
It wasn't inspirational. It wasn't motivating to see ever at any point in my childhood to see that. I think it serves, and it has always served, like you said with the media, it serves to get the image out across the globe that, hey, this is what people have to deal with over here in America. And it serves as a negative review on white Americans. It doesn't give inspiration for Black people. It's like we would have to go through X, Y, and Z, all of these terrible things just to eat unseasoned food.
Yeah, I remember, what was the documentary where they were talking about sitting at that counter and the food wasn't even good?
Yeah.
Like, why did I do this?
Yeah, and it's like, if they're questioning that, you know, as people who actually live through that, I have to question if it's worth, you know, trying to model activism in the same way of like, I'm going to resist so much that I'm experiencing, you know, more trauma than I need to. And I think the Panthers pulled things from the Nation of Islam as far as community, but they blew out of proportion, I guess, not the defense. The defense was fine, but the visual symbolism of what it meant, number one, to be in uniform. That's what we saw represented in the Nation of Islam, to be a people of uniform, to have the guns and the way that the police have the guns, and to be just a show of force, a visual like representation of like, we can the same way that you can. And I think a gap needed to be bridged between the two that the leaders needed to do on their own, not the factions, you know, of people coming up with their own stuff that adjacent maybe to the mission, but like I don't think that it was as long lasting as it needed to be. My grandparents were both Black Panthers, and is a phase when they talk about it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something that you are forever or you were forever. So it makes me think about all of the people who were rocking the afros back then, who were a part socially, adjacently to the Black Panther Party, but today are just like, you know, I don't want to be attached to that.
Yeah, and I think that people forget just how like litigious these movements were as well, where it's like demonstrations, it's a show of force, it's a show of either a show of force or a show of nonviolent resistance, depending on what your group is. But it's like, as you were saying, Malcolm X wanted to essentially like sue the United States. The reason that they wanted to do wanted the Voting Rights Act wasn't just to vote for the principle of it, but because I think, was it either in Selma or Rustin, where basically Black people in the South are being killed, no jury would convict them, because in order to be represented in the jury, you have to be voted. So there were so many things, like the Montgomery bus boycott, or the the program that the Black Panthers had for like the libraries and the bookstores and all these other things. Like, so many things were like strategic plans to circumvent just all of the ways that, because I don't think that, I mean, maybe for Martin Luther King, but I don't think for anyone's end goal is to change white people's minds and to make white people really love us, but instead for it to be like, even if they hate us, it wouldn't change our lives. It wouldn't negatively affect our lives as a whole. and having to depend on the kindness and goodwill of white people and whether they like us or not.
Yeah. A quote that was said in our friend Martin from Martin Luther King. I don't know if this was something he actually said or something he added in there, but he was just like, he said, "You can threaten our children and we will still love you."
What?
Yeah. I was like, I'm gonna have to research just to see if he actually said that.
Did he say
or if this is propaganda. That,
why would you do
right?
that?
And even if he said that, why would you use that one excerpt to put?
Why would you use that? And also, that's a kids movie too.
Yeah. It's like I just feel really unprotected if Martin is like threaten our kids and we'll still open arms to white people.
That's okay.
I think that they were trying to make him like an extremely docile character for children in that movie. And I think you're right as far as like there's a way to go about it. I think Martin had the systemic pipeline down. Like when it came to the voting, like he was like, we need the right to vote because in order to have a jury of our peers while we're being mass incarcerated after we've been freed from slavery, we need a jury of our own peers. And in order to have a jury of your own peers, you have to be registered to vote and you have to be a voter. And he knew that. And I feel like when it comes to Malcolm, in comparison, Malcolm was more focused on the emotional catharsis of Black people, whereas Martin was like, I have to play these games to figure out how to systemically change things for my people on a legal way. And legally, if you grew up in Georgia or Alabama, it probably felt like the police legally were allowed to do whatever the fuck they wanted to you. So, Martin coming from an educated Black family in the South and a very deeply religious family, I'm sure he knew that he had to navigate or was taught that he had to navigate a certain way. And Malcolm X, being someone from the North and growing up in the city, and you're taught that, in the South it's way worse. They deal with so much, terrible things. And I think in the North, when you hear that, you instinctively or subconsciously expect to be treated equally. And you're expecting to be treated the same. But then when that doesn't happen, it seeds anger.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're already expecting that, you have to take that emotion and turn it into something else.
Yeah. Well, and I think that also if you spend so much more time around white people, then they lose their mystique. Like, growing up in a segregated Black town in the South, most people you're going to interact with are other Black people. And then usually the only touch points you have with white people are negative. And it's like they're this nebulous force, just, whatever. But your day to day, but for someone like Malcolm X or someone in an integrated place in the North or something like that, you see that the white people who are oppressing you aren't that smart. I mean, it's not that people in the South didn't know this or see this, but the more you get to know people, the more they become people to you. So they're not that smart. They're not that great. They're not that strong or powerful. Like, these people with all these faults somehow have so much more power over me. So what? But yeah, I agree. I think that you need both. You need both. You need the strategic and I feel like both of them were strategic, but I do agree that Malcolm X was more, and they both evoked emotions in their own way. And I think that Malcolm X ultimately really helped Martin Luther King. Unfortunately, I also think he helped sanitize the image of Martin Luther King, which is not the fault of either of them. But even in, I think it was Selma, Lyndon B. Johnson was like, well, I'll help you. You're not like Malcolm X or whatever. I think having a more extreme, more anti-white figurehead helped the white people feel like, okay, well, I will choose. Well, I am forced to make a choice. Whereas I think if it was just Martin Luther King, they'd be like, well, we don't have to listen to you. It's like now there are two very prominent figures. Well, I like you. You're not as, which also sanitizes Martin Luther King's image because he wasn't all sunshines and roses and I love white people. But the white people caricaturized I don't even know what I'm saying, but you know what I mean. Like, they blew up the image of Malcolm X so much as this anti-white, like, boogeyman, that then, therefore, they're like, well, because people always like to think in extremes. Mm-hmm. So I do agree that they definitely needed each other. I think that they made each other more effective. And it would have been amazing to see that at work more and to see them really, like, play off each other. I mean, who knows the conversations they might have had. But yeah.
I would have loved to have been in the room, honestly. Because I feel like you've got Martin, who's like, he gives, like you said, there's polar opposites when it comes to white perception. It's like Martin gives, oh, you could beat me 1,000,000 times and I'm still going to be about my business.
Which is so funny because they're so much closer than how they are portrayed. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
And I think people underestimate what it means to be an enemy of the state, to be an enemy of the government, to be an enemy of the structures at play. And the FBI was spying on Martin because he was a threat to that state. Mm-hmm. He was encouraging people to vote.
Mm-hmm. He said he was a communist.
Yeah.
They had, at least in Rustin, they had the rumors that he was in a relationship with Byron Rustin, that he was like queer, et cetera, like, and now it's so funny because for a moment they basically tried to smear his name and now they try to give it like an edit where now it's all sunshine and roses.
Yeah. I think Rustin's portrayal in that movie was also really interesting. Mm-hmm. Martin's portrayal too. They had a lot of respectability politics going on that were very familiar, unfortunately. Yep. I felt like at the point where they were calling him Mr. March on Washington, and like in a not a derogatory, but they were trying to minimize his accomplishments of organizing. Mm-hmm. And I think similar to Malcolm X, having the experience of being Black, being gay, and being an activist, you have this understanding of the dynamics of society where you can organize at such a high level. You can organize your community because you pay so much attention to how people interact that you can do these great organizations. Yeah. Like, it can be intersectional. Like, the people that he was encouraging were completely diverse. And I think it was an interesting show to see someone who was a part of the civil rights movement who lived a diverse life.
Yeah. And wasn't really closeted necessarily either. No, I agree. And it was interesting too because in the film they were talking about how he was the one who convinced Martin Luther King to do nonviolent resistance or something like that. I don't know how accurate it is. I'm sure it is to an extent, but it also made me think like, okay, so what is it about this character, this person who was a formerly communist, as far as the movie says, fairly, or at least non-closeted gay man, that was like his thing. Like, that's what his philosophy was. Why? Because I was like, you might be like, you're more oppressed than, Martin Luther King. Like, what is it about? And it might have just been an individual thing. It might have been a practical thing. It might have been something that he just felt like strategically would work best. Yeah, I also like how they portrayed Martin Luther King Jr. as making a mistake in terms of letting him go and falling, like, and just failing in that regard and failing him. I feel like sometimes some movies try to make him seem like, as they said in Betty and Coretta, like, he was not a saint, He made mistakes. He had moments of weakness. So I did like that as well. Yeah, it was an interesting movie for sure.
I think when Byard wasn't expecting them to fire him, I think that was a very important scene. I think that it showed the importance of friendship and allegiance and allyship. when it comes to being queer and the intersectionality of like he was relying on his friend to back him up, but he couldn't because of the powers that be as far as the NAACP. And Adam Clayton Powell threatening to out him. Very lame. And implicate Martin in his sexuality as a smear. And this is another black leader. And we're supposed to just be like, okay, well, we're supposed to accept that as fact, or not just fact, but like that's okay. And I think that it's important to talk about not just the respectability, but trying to keep someone from achieving a certain position within the community as a queer person. And I think being threatened by his rise, as if it would diminish his own, between Bayard and Martin. Because Adam Clayton Powell went on to be appointed to, I don't remember which committee, but one of the committees, government committee. So as he was getting promoted, he wanted to keep someone else down. And I think that seeing the dynamic of that is important for the community because it's completely unnecessary, but it's something that happens every day.
Every single day. Yeah. And I think that it's interesting because the arguments that they were saying is that your presence can weaken the movement, and yet you would publish something and smear something that would actually weaken the movement.
Right.
But it was also interesting to see that Martin Luther King, you know, his moment of weakness, agreeing that he should be fired, wasn't because of his religious beliefs, even though he was a pastor, he was very religious. It was because of politics. That it seemed like he had no objection, or at least not in the film, to Bayard's queerness or anything like that. He had that wasn't the thing. It just seems like it always came down to politics and manufactured hierarchies. And I think that film was interesting in that I feel like it shows within our own community, we constantly just recreate and manufacture these hierarchies always, all the time. And it's seemingly for no reason, really. But just not allowing this queer person to ascend. And, you know, thankfully he still did, which is what makes it inspirational, what makes it a movie, and what makes it produced by the Obamas. But why this is such a constant thing, why whenever there is, why none of the movies can be singular, because also in in Rustin, there was a moment where I think her name was Dr. Hedgeman. She was like, all of the women who wanted to support this are pulling out because you didn't have any women on this. And then they were like, well, that's sad that you would do that. And she's like, well, it's sad that I have to.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where I think it showed in terms of intersectionality, it was just kind of a mess, which is not surprising. That's always how things are. But how people can speak so powerfully and so beautifully about all of these things and then still in the same breath be like, actually, it's not a good look to have you here. It is kind of amazing just how constant that is.
I think him being threatened to be outed and then still in that same movie actually be outed publicly. At such a high level, you know, talking about his Pasadena arrests. And seeing his crash out and how he dealt with that was an amazing performance by Coleman Domingo, to say the least. The line that really, really stuck with me was him saying, on the day that I was born black, I was also born a homosexual. They either believe in freedom for all or they don't. And I think today I would like to put that on my mirror so that I remember how far we've come and how fast our administration is trying to repeal that progress.
And it really is, it just feels like lines in the sand. Like, people pushed and fought and died, and no one died for any of these things, but died doing all these things and then were killed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and yet it feels like in one moment it can be taken away, and it feels like it's this constant thing. Like nothing is for nothing is for certain, nothing is for granted. Like, and it's sad, and it's actually interesting because we talked about this a little bit last time, not in terms of like this level of severity, but in terms of waning representation of Black actors, and just in Black shows, Black films. Why it feels like things are a little bit worse than they were before, and it just there was such a push a couple years ago for better representation, for more representation, and it just feels like as soon as people stop pushing just a little bit, let up just a little bit, immediately things regress.
Mm-hmm.
And how it just feels like it is a never-ending need and fight to keep pushing, because as soon as you don't,
You can't get too comfortable.
you can't.
Truly. Because if the enemy's not comfortable, nothing's set in stone.
No, and you could be existing and people wouldn't be comfortable.
That is our first episode
Yes.
of the Hollywood Podcast. I'm Taylor McMullen, and this is my co-host,
Gabrielle Green.
We will be coming back to you next week going over sisterhood, and we will be covering one of them days, and we
Yes.
encourage you to go to the box office, buy your tickets, go see it.
Exactly. Support.
Absolutely. And we will see you next time.
All right. See y'all next time.